Welcome to the Sand Science Experience podcast, where we explore the latest and most exciting papers and preprints in science. If you find this deep dive insightful, please do take a moment to like, subscribe, and maybe share it with friends and family. It really supports the Sand Science Experience and helps us keep bringing this kind of research to you. Today, we're diving into something absolutely fundamental, almost like the cellular plumbing, you could say. It's the system that really determines how long our cells, and therefore we, can function properly. We're looking at this massive, complex quality control system called protein homeostasis or proteostasis.
That's a great way to put it, actually, the plumbing.
Yeah.
Because if you picture a cell, it's like a factory, right? And it relies on thousands upon thousands of tiny machines, those are proteins, to get anything done. Now, for that factory to run smoothly, every single one of those protein machines needs to fold into a very precise 3D shape. And it has to maintain that shape its whole working life. Proteostasis is basically the state of keeping that entire toolkit, the whole proteome, balanced and working.
Okay, and what's becoming clear is this isn't just some, passive janitorial service in the cell. This is a huge active defense network. The research shows it's not just a couple of genes doing housekeeping. We're talking, an ecosystem of molecular chaperones, degradation machines, regulators, something like 2,000 proteins in our cells just for this.
The scale is, frankly, staggering. And the consequences when it fails are just as big. When this network starts to wobble, starts to decline, that failure is deeply, profoundly linked with aging itself. And it seems to accelerate the onset of pretty much all the major neurodegenerative diseases we worry about, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. So yeah, if you want to get a handle on age-related disease, you absolutely have to understand why proteostasis starts to collapse.
Right. So let's start with the basics then. Before it collapses, how does this network actually work? How's it structured? You mentioned it has like three main parts, three arms working together.
Exactly. Think of it like a three-stage quality control pipeline. It makes sure proteins are made right, kept right under stress, and then, crucially, cleared out if they get damaged beyond fixing. So arm one is right at the beginning, protein synthesis and folding. I mean, think about it. A human cell might have over 10,000 different kinds of proteins. As these long chains are being made, they have to navigate this really complex, sort of bumpy energy landscape to find their final functional fold.
Right. I picture it like trying to roll a ball down a hill into a specific hole at the bottom, but there are loads of little potholes on the way down that it could get stuck in.
That's a perfect analogy. Those potholes are what we call kinetically stable structures, basically misfolded shapes. They're not functional. And worse, they tend to be sticky. They want to clump together, aggregate, and that's where the first line of defense comes in. The molecular chaperones, you've probably heard of some, like HSP70, HSP9.
The heat shock proteins, yeah.
Those are the main ones. They act like those chaperones. They bind to these non-native sticky bits on the newly forming proteins. They stop them from clumping up with their neighbors and actively help guide them towards the correct low-energy folded state. They're kind of like the monitors on the assembly line.
Okay, makes sense. They're right there at the start, making sure things fold correctly. So what about arm two? Once a protein is folded and doing its job.
Right. Arm two is all about conformational maintenance. It's about dealing with stress from the environment. See, even a correctly folded protein isn't super stable. It's often only marginally stable. And everyday stresses, maybe a bit of heat, oxidative damage from metabolism, heavy metals, things like that, they can knock it out of shape. They can cause it to unfold and start to aggregate again.
So the cell needs a way to react quickly when things get tough, a sort of system-wide alert. Not just fixing one protein, but prepping the whole cell.
It absolutely does. And the main defense here is the heat shock response. This is controlled by a master switch, a transcription factor called HSF1. Now, when misfolded proteins start to build up, they actually act like sponges for chaperones, pulling them away from HSF1. This frees up HSF1. It zooms into the nucleus and flips the switch on hundreds of genes, massively boosting the production of more chaperones. It increases the cell's folding capacity. But here's the really clever bit. At the same time, HSF1 is boosting chaperones. It also signals to slow down general protein synthesis.
Ah, okay. So it turns down the tap of new proteins coming in, which might just add to the problem, while simultaneously ramping up the cleanup and refolding crew. That must reduce the overall burden significantly. It gives the cell breathing room.
Exactly. It's a really elegant way to stabilize the whole protein environment, the proteome, when it's under stress.
Okay, that brings us to arm three, the final disposal, protein degradation. If a protein really is damaged beyond repair or just wasn't made right in the first place, how does the cell get rid of it? There are two main routes, right?
That's right. Two major systems. First, there's the ubiquitin proteasome system, the UPS. You can think of the UPS as the targeted shredder for individual specific substrate proteins. It's very precise. Then there's the autophagosomal lysosomal pathway. Autophagy is a much bigger deal. This system basically engulfs large chunks of cellular material, maybe big protein clumps, aggregates, or even whole damaged organelles like mitochondria. It wraps them in a membrane and sends that package off to the lysosome, which is like the cell's recycling center, to be completely broken down. So the difference is really size and scale.
And what's really neat here, you mentioned, is that the chaperones, the folding helpers from arm 1, they actually cooperate with this disposal system too.
Yes, that's a crucial link. They don't just fold, they can also flag proteins for destruction. Take an enzyme called sHIP. It's an E3 ubiquitin ligase. It works directly with chaperones like hSP70 and hSP90. So if a chaperone has tried, maybe multiple times, to fold a protein and it just keeps failing, the chaperone can essentially hand off that internally misfolded protein to CHIP. CIP then puts a tag on it, a ubiquitin tag, and that tag is the signal. Send this one to the proteasome for destruction. Quality control leads straight to disposal.
Okay, right. So that's the system in theory. Robust, interconnected. But now let's get to the heart of the aging problem. The evidence seems overwhelming that the capacity of this whole network just declines as we get older. Why is that decline so bad, especially for cells like neurons, the ones that don't divide and have to last a lifetime?
Well, it's because the damage just builds up. Neurons are postmitotic, they don't divide. So every bit of misfolded protein, every aggregate they accumulate over years, decades, they're stuck with it, potentially for 100 years. Eventually, the burden just gets too high, the system gets overwhelmed, it reaches a tipping point. And we see this really clearly in studies on model organisms, like in the little worm, C. elegans. When researchers looked at its entire proteome as it aged, they saw what they called extensive proteome remodeling. Something like a third of all the proteins they could measure changed significantly in amount. The whole balance is off. It's not just damage, the whole factory floor is disorganized.
So what stands out from those aging studies, especially in, say, worms that are genetically tweaked to live longer? Do they just manage to keep this proteostasis network running perfectly, like when they were young?
This is where it gets really fascinating. It gives us a big clue about adaptation. These long-lived worms, like the famous DAF2 mutants, they have altered insulin GF, signaling they don't necessarily keep their network pristine in the same way a young worm does. Instead, they seem to adapt. They dramatically crank up the production of a different class of chaperones. The small heat shock proteins, sHSPs, we're talking huge increases, like 15-fold, even 60-fold more sHSPs than normal.
Wow, okay, so the cell sort of senses it's losing the battle to prevent misfolding, and it switches tactics completely.
Pretty much. It seems to be a kind of fail-safe protective mechanism. When the main chaperones, the hSP70s and 90s, can't keep up with preventing misfolding, the organism shifts strategy. It moves from preventing aggregation to managing it. These small HSPs, they don't really try to refold things. Instead, they actively grab onto these newly forming soluble aggregates and help sequester them into larger, more organized, generally less toxic bundles called inclusion bodies. It's basically controlled protein aggregation. Making a trade-off, better to have a few large contained piles of junk than lots of small, reactive, toxic bits floating around causing havoc.
Okay, that leads us straight into neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. We always hear about the big plaques and tingles, amyloid fibrils, Lewy bodies, those large piles of junk. But if the cell's strategy under stress is actually controlled aggregation into big clumps, then maybe the real villains are the things that come before the big clumps. So which type of aggregate is actually doing the most damage? This is where it gets really interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely. While those large plaques are the defining pathological hallmarks you see under a microscope, the growing consensus in the field, and it's pretty strong now, is that the major cytotoxic species, the things actually killing cells, are the soluble oligomers. These are the intermediate stages. They're not yet the big, stable fibrils. They're small, maybe 20 to 60 protein molecules, loosely clumped together, still soluble, still floating around. And because they haven't locked into that stable fibril structure yet, they are much more dynamic, chemically reactive, and mobile. They're kind of like tiny toxic intermediates causing trouble before they settle down into the larger, relatively inert plaques, like little gangs roaming the cell before they form a big stationary mob.
And these toxic gangs, these oligomers, they cause damage in, it seems, two main ways, which then sets the cell up for that total collapse we mentioned. The first way is just direct attack.
Yeah, direct membrane damage. Because they're structurally flexible and have exposed sticky bits, These soluble oligomers are really good at interacting with and disrupting lipid membranes. They might poke holes in them, form pore-like structures. This can be particularly damaging at sensitive spots like neuronal synapses.
Okay, membrane damage is bad enough, but the second mechanism sounds even more insidious because it actually dismantles the cell's own defenses, leading to that systemic failure. How do they do that?
It's through sequestration and inhibition. These sticky oligomers don't just damage membranes, they glom onto other important soluble molecules inside the cell. They can grab things needed for transport between the nucleus and cytoplasm, or components involved in making RNA and proteins. But crucially, they also bind to and sequester the protective factors themselves, the chaperones and components of the proteasome. So think about it. The toxic waste product is actively trapping the garbage collectors and the recycling crew. This pulls them out of the available pool, meaning there are fewer protectors around to deal with new folding problems or other damaged proteins.
Right, so it creates this terrible feedback loop. The initial age-related decline lets some oligomers form. Those oligomers then trap the remaining chaperones and proteasomes, which further reduces the cell's ability to cope, leading to more misfolding and oligomer formation. And eventually, the whole proteostasis network just collapses under the strain. The system effectively cannibalizes itself.
That's exactly it. It's a cascading failure. You end up in a situation where you can't clear the damage because the damage itself has disabled the clearance machinery.
Okay, so given that this network normally fights against this aggregate buildup, the therapeutic ideas seem to fall into two camps, right? Either stop making so much of the aggregation-prone protein in the first place, or maybe more broadly, find ways to boost the network's own capacity, help the cleanup crew keep up.
Yes, and that second approach, pharmacologically augmenting the proteostasis network, holds enormous promise, precisely because it tackles the core failure that happens with age. If we can somehow dial up the network's strength, maybe we can help the cell regain balance.
So what kinds of things are being tried? How can we boost the folding and maintenance side, arm 1 and 2?
Well, researchers are trying to artificially activate those stress responses we talked about, like finding drugs to gently boost HSF1 activity to make more chaperones, or even using gene therapy approaches to directly overexpress key chaperones like HSP70, or that big barrel-shaped chaperonin complex called Autophagy in vulnerable cells. And these kinds of approaches, well, they've shown real promise in ameliorating disease signs in animal models.
And what about boosting arm 3, the degradation side? Can we make the cell better at taking out the trash?
Definitely, that's another major focus. Enhancing degradation is key. There are small molecules like rapamycin and related compounds that are known inducers of autophagy. They basically turn up the dial on that bulk clearance system. And these have shown clear benefits in animal models of various neurodegenerative conditions. People are also looking for ways to directly boost the activity of the proteasome, the UPS system. The attraction of these strategies is they could be quite general, helping the cell cope with protein damage overall, not just targeting one specific disease protein. It's about reinforcing the fundamental machinery against aging.
You know, this brings up a really interesting kind of provocative thought to maybe end on. Think about germ cells, sperm and eggs, or some types of stem cells. They are the ultimate masters of proteostasis, aren't they? They have to pass on a pristine, undamaged set of proteins, a clean proteome, across generations, potentially indefinitely.
They absolutely do. They've somehow figured out how to keep that quality control machinery running at peak efficiency, essentially forever. They resist this age-related decline.
So their success suggests that it's not biologically impossible, right? It is fundamentally possible to maintain or even rejuvenate the proteostasis network, even in cells that have to last a long time, like our neurons. And if we could learn their tricks, figure out how to harness those mechanisms, we wouldn't just be talking about treatments to slow down specific diseases like Alzheimer's after they've started. We might actually be looking at strategies to delay the onset of a whole range of age-related problems in the first place, to fundamentally extend our health span, the period of life spent in good health. That's a really powerful idea, isn't it? It's the potential to maybe rewrite a part of the aging script just by helping our cells manage their proteins better. So just to quickly recap, we've explored this incredibly complex three-armed proteostasis network. We talked about how its capacity declines with age, leading to a vicious cycle driven by those toxic soluble oligomers. And we touched on the exciting therapeutic possibilities of boosting this system to fight disease and potentially extend healthy aging. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. If you found it insightful, please do remember to hit like and subscribe. It really helps support the Sans Science experience. We'll see you next time.